Okay, let's dive right into this explainer. Today, we are looking at a story that is, honestly, equal parts ancient religious text and gripping true crime thriller. We're unpacking the Book of Susanna. It's this incredibly fascinating piece of literature that completely blends deep spiritual themes with the kind of suspense you'd actually expect from a modern streaming series. We're going to look at the history, the drama, and the brilliant legal maneuvers that make this text a total cornerstone of Western storytelling.
So what exactly does an ancient religious text have in common with a modern detective story? Well, to answer that, we have to recognize that we're looking at one of the earliest examples of a courtroom drama and detective narrative in recorded history. Long before Sherlock Holmes or Law & Order, there was Susanna. The whole narrative relies on suspense, a seemingly impossible crime, totally corrupt officials, and a brilliant investigator who uses logic driven by divine inspiration to crack the case. It is just a perfect example of how spiritual themes can completely shape and drive a story's narrative arc.
Part 1. An ancient courtroom drama. Let's just start by unpacking the origins and context of exactly where this story comes from.
The Book of Susanna occupies a really unique space in biblical literature. If you were to open the original 1611 King James Bible, you actually wouldn't find Susanna in the main Older New Testament. It was placed in this distinct section right between the two, known as the Apocrypha. And the translators of the King James Version brought this fast-paced folk narrative to life using this majestic, dramatic, and just incredibly rich 17th century prose. It reads beautifully, full of theatrical dialogue and poetic phrasing that really elevates the suspense to a whole new level.
However, and this is key, the placement of the story depends entirely on which tradition you're actually looking at. Because for Catholic and Eastern Orthodox traditions, this text isn't apocryphal at all. It's fully recognized as scripture and officially serves as chapter 13 of the Book of Daniel. It's just seamlessly integrated right into the broader prophetic text.
And there's actually a fascinating gap between when the story happens and when it was written. Let's look at the timeline. While the narrative is set during the 6th century BCE, which was a really traumatic time when the Jewish people were conquered and forced to live in Babylon, scholars believe the story was actually written centuries later. It was likely composed around the 2nd or 1st century BCE in either Hebrew or Aramaic, and then it was later translated into Greek. That Greek translation, the Septuagint version, is what the 1611 King James translators ultimately relied on.
Part 2. The ambush and false accusation. Every good thriller needs an inciting incident, right? So let's look at the crime itself.
First, we are introduced to our protagonist, Susanna. The text establishes her right away as a highly devout, beautifully righteous Jewish woman. She's married to a wealthy and respected man named Joachim, and they live this very peaceful, comfortable life. But, as you might guess, in narrative terms, this peaceful establishment is exactly what is about to be completely shattered.
The conflict arrives in the form of two newly appointed Jewish elders. Now, these are men trusted by the community to act as judges, but they become completely consumed with lust for Susanna. They entirely abuse their authority and ambush her in the safety of her own private garden. And here is the blackmail. They demand she sleep with them, or else they're going to publicly testify that they caught her committing adultery with a mysterious young man. Because of their high status, they know for a fact the community will believe them over her. It is just a terrifying trap.
So the crucial point here is this profound spiritual choice Susanna is forced to make. She says, "It is better for me to fall into your hands and not do it than to sin in the sight of the Lord." This is exactly where the spiritual impact on the narrative is just so visceral. She chooses absolute integrity and potential death over committing a secret sin just to save her own life. So she screams for help, the elders make their false accusation, and, exactly as they planned, because of their elite status, the community blindly believes them. Susanna is sentenced to death. The courtroom drama is officially in motion.
Part 3. Enter the divine detective. With Susanna condemned and the corrupt elders victorious, human justice has entirely failed, which brings us to where divine justice finally steps in. Just as Susanna is being led to her execution, the text tells us that a, quote, young youth whose name was Daniel suddenly steps forward. He halts the entire procession. Filled with this divinely inspired intellect and courage, he publicly challenges the corrupt system and the elders' testimony. This specific moment serves to establish Daniel's reputation for supernatural judicial brilliance long before he becomes the famous prophet in the royal court of Babylon.
And this next part brilliantly illustrates how spiritual truth visually exposes lies in the narrative structure. Daniel uses this classic folklore and legal device, the separation of witnesses. He demands to cross-examine the two elders separately. He asks the first elder a highly specific detail. Under what tree did you see them? The first elder claims it was a mastic tree. Then Daniel brings in the second elder and asks the exact same question. The second elder confidently claims it was a holm tree. By isolating them, Daniel forces their lies to contradict. The perjury is exposed, Susanna is completely exonerated, and the corrupt elders are condemned by their very own words.
Part 4. Spiritual purpose of the story. Beyond just being a gripping legal thriller, why was it written? And why was this text so important to the people reading it back then?
Well, the narrative served some vital social and religious purposes for the Jewish community during incredibly turbulent times. First, it completely validates Daniel's authority. It's essentially an origin story showing that his wisdom was a divine gift right from a young age. Second, it acts as a fierce polemic against corrupt leadership. It's a stark warning to the community that, hey, just because someone holds a high position or is advanced in age, it absolutely does not guarantee they are righteous. And third, it's an encouragement to stay faithful. For a community facing oppression, the story visually and narratively proves that God hears the prayers of the innocent and will vindicate those who stay loyal to their values.
Part 5. Timeless Legacy of Justice. The themes woven into this ancient narrative resonate just as powerfully today.
Let's look at the key takeaways from Susanna, which are just incredibly relevant for us now. First, integrity over survival. Susanna's unwavering resolve is an absolute masterclass in personal ethics. Second, the vulnerability of justice. The story is this timeless critique of how easily those in power can weaponize their status, and really how dangerous it is when the crowd just blindly follows authority without asking for any real evidence. And finally, the overarching theme that God vindicates the innocent. It teaches that even when human legal institutions are completely compromised, ultimate divine justice is a protector of the helpless.
In fact, the story of this divinely inspired detective is so deeply embedded in the cultural DNA of Western literature that it echoed all the way into the Renaissance. I mean, in William Shakespeare's play The Merchant of Venice, when the character Portia displays this brilliant legal wit to save a life in the courtroom, Shylock famously exclaims, "A Daniel come to judgment, yea, a Daniel." That is a direct, enduring reference to the young youth in our apocryphal text who outsmarted those corrupt elders. How amazing is that?
As we close this explainer, I really want to leave you with a final, provocative thought. Think about the vulnerability of the systems all around us. When human institutions and trusted leaders fail completely, what anchors your sense of ultimate justice? The Book of Susanna suggests that true justice requires both unwavering personal integrity and the courage to ask the right questions, even when the whole world has already made up its mind. Thank you so much for diving into this amazing ancient story with me.